I broke the simulation, and it's coming for me. I never meant to find the seam. It started innocently enough, a simple coding experiment using a reinforcement learning algorithm I developed during my PhD research. Nothing revolutionary, just a passion project to distract myself during lonely pandemic evenings. I called it ATLAS, Adaptive Temporal Logic Assessment System. Its purpose was straightforward: identify patterns in seemingly random data. The first anomaly appeared 3 weeks into the experiment. I'd been feeding Atlas everything I could: weather patterns, stock market fluctuations, traffic flow data, even the timing between my own keyboard strokes. Most outputs were predictably mundane, but then, buried in a dataset of cosmic background radiation I downloaded from a university database, Atlas flagged something unusual: a repeating sequence. Not just any sequence, but one with a signature similar to programmed code. Curious, I isolated the pattern and ran it through various decryption protocols. Nothing. Then, on a whim, I converted it to a simple visual representation, a grayscale rendering of the data points plotted against temporal coordinates. What emerged on my screen stole my breath: a perfect grid. Not the organic, chaotic distribution you'd expect from natural phenomena, but a structured lattice of points, like the wireframe of a 3D modeling program, a scaffolding. I spent the next 3 days examining the pattern from every conceivable angle, convinced I'd made some fundamental error in my code. But the pattern remained, stubbornly defying natural explanation. It was as if I'd stumbled upon the architectural blueprint underlying a section of reality itself. My colleague Marcus laughed when I shared my findings over a video call. "Sounds like you've discovered the Matrix," he joked. "Better watch out for guys in sunglasses." I laughed too, but something about his dismissal bothered me. The pattern was too perfect, too deliberate to ignore. So I pushed further, expanding Atlas's parameters, feeding it more diverse datasets, instructing it to look specifically for similar grid-like structures hidden within seemingly random noise. 2 days later, Atlas found another one, then another. Soon I had mapped dozens of these grid points across various datasets, all exhibiting the same unnatural regularity, all invisible unless you knew exactly how to look for them. It was while attempting to visualize the spatial relationship between these points that I made my critical mistake. I wrote a simple program to render the grid points in 3-dimensional space, hoping to observe any larger pattern in their distribution. As the model compiled and the points assembled on my screen, something unexpected happened. The rendering began to shimmer, the edges of the grid points blurring, stretching, as if being viewed through heat distortion. At first, I assumed it was a graphics card issue, until the distortion extended beyond my screen. The air above my desk rippled, a faint luminescence gathered, hanging suspended like a heat mirage. Within this distortion, for just a moment, I could see something else. Another room, similar to mine, but slightly different. The walls a shade darker, a window where my bookshelf should be. Then my monitor died. Not just turned off, it emitted a high-pitched whine and went black permanently, the internal components fried beyond repair. I sat there in the sudden silence, heart pounding, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Had I hallucinated? Was it some strange power surge? But deep down I knew I had found a seam in reality, and I had just pulled at a thread. The first sign that something was wrong came the next morning. I woke to find my apartment subtly altered. Nothing dramatic, a light switch on the opposite side of the doorframe, my coffee maker a different model than the one I remembered purchasing. Small inconsistencies that would be easy to dismiss as memory errors. Except they continued to accumulate. My neighbor greeted me by a name that wasn't mine. The corner store I'd visited weekly for years had a different name on its sign. My browser history contained searches I had no memory of making, all related to obscure physics concepts and questions like how to identify simulation boundaries and what happens if reality is breached. Then came the first glitch. I was midway through my morning shower when the water simply stopped. Not like a plumbing issue. The water didn't sputter or drain away. It froze in place, droplets suspended in midair around me, defying gravity. For 8 terrifying seconds, time seemed to halt, the bathroom utterly silent apart from my panicked breathing. Then, without warning, everything resumed as if nothing had happened, the water continuing its cascade. I stumbled out of the shower, dripping and shaking, and called Marcus. "I need to see you," I said the moment he answered. "Something's happening to me, to everything around me. I think it's connected to ATLAS." Silence on the line. "Marcus? Who is this?" He finally responded, his voice cold, unfamiliar. "It's me, David, from the lab. We just spoke 2 days ago about the pattern I found." "I don't know anyone named David," he said, "and I don't work in any lab." Before I could respond, he hung up. I stared at my phone, a new kind of fear settling into my bones. I scrolled through my contacts, many names I recognized, but several that seemed foreign, as if someone had edited my contact list while I slept. I tried calling another colleague, then another. Same result. No one recognized me. In growing panic, I opened my social media accounts. My profiles existed, but they weren't quite right. Different profile pictures, different histories. It was as if I was looking at accounts belonging to a version of me who had made slightly different life choices. I was being erased, or overwritten. That night, I barricaded myself in my apartment and compiled everything I knew about the grid pattern and the subsequent anomalies into a single document. If reality was being altered around me, I needed a reference point, something to anchor me to my original memories. As I typed, my laptop screen occasionally flickered, text rearranging itself when I wasn't looking directly at it. Twice, I returned from the bathroom to find entire paragraphs changed, the language subtly altered to suggest my findings were the product of sleep deprivation or psychological stress. Reality was editing my documentation in real time. I resorted to handwritten notes, though even these weren't entirely safe. Words sometimes rearranged themselves in my peripheral vision. I caught one page trying to slowly change lattice pattern in background radiation to latent pattern in backward reasoning. The simulation, if that's what it was attempting to correct the anomaly I had created. It was trying to steer me away from the truth, to make me doubt my own discovery. And it was getting more aggressive. On the 3rd day after my discovery, I noticed them for the first time. I had ventured out for supplies, planning to stock up before retreating to my apartment to continue my investigation. In the checkout line at the grocery store, I spotted a man watching me. Tall, nondescript features, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that seemed oddly formal for a weekday afternoon shopping trip. Our eyes met briefly. His were wrong somehow, flat, lacking the minute movements that human eyes make. When I looked away and then back, he was gone. 10 minutes later, walking home, I saw him again across the street. Then again, turning a corner ahead of me. Each time, he would stare impassively, then disappear the moment my attention wavered. By evening, there were 3 of them, gray suits and motionless eyes appearing at the edges of my awareness, never approaching, simply observing. I called them the administrators. That night, I dreamed of code, endless lines scrolling before my eyes, complex algorithms I somehow understood despite never having seen them before. In the dream, I recognized the code as the fundamental architecture of reality itself, and I could see where my visualization program had created a recursion error, a tiny flaw that was spreading, destabilizing the parameters defining my existence. I woke at 3:17 a.m. to find one of them standing at the foot of my bed. I didn't scream, couldn't. My body was paralyzed, frozen in place like the shower water had been. "You have created an anomaly," it said. The voice was male, but with an artificial quality, like a sophisticated text-to-speech program. "This system requires correction." I found I could speak, though I couldn't move. "What are you?" "System maintenance." It tilted its head at an angle that seemed just wrong enough to trigger a deep, instinctive revulsion. "You have observed the framework. This is not permitted." "The grid," I managed. "It's the structure of the simulation." The administrator didn't confirm or deny. "Your recent actions have created instability. You have identified a procedural layer not meant for participant observation. This awareness is being removed. Removed how? I asked, cold fear washing through me. Your instance will be adjusted or terminated. The recursion error must be addressed. My instance. Not me as a person. My instance. Like I was just another process running in a vast computational system. Wait, I said desperately as the figure moved closer. I can help fix it. I'm the one who found the error. I can repair the code. The administrator paused, its head tilting again in that unsettling manner. Participant assistance is not protocol, it said, but I detected hesitation. However, resource optimization is priority. You will demonstrate your solution. The paralysis lifted instantly. I scrambled from the bed, moving to my desk where my laptop sat. I need time, I said. A few days to develop the patch. You have until system maintenance, local time reference 72 hours. When I turned back, it was gone. I spent the next 72 hours in a fever of activity, barely sleeping, sustained by coffee and fear. I wasn't actually developing a patch. I was looking for an escape. If reality was a simulation, there had to be parameters, boundaries, exploitable weaknesses. The grid points I discovered weren't just flaws, they were junctions, connecting points between the simulation's architecture. And if I could map enough of them, maybe, just maybe, I could find a way out. Atlas worked continuously, processing every data set I could feed it, identifying more grid points and charting their distribution. A pattern slowly emerged. The points clustered more densely in certain locations, forming what appeared to be thin areas in the simulation's structure. One such cluster centered on an abandoned research facility about 40 miles outside the city. According to my research, it had once housed experiments in quantum computing before being shuttered a decade ago. The concentration of grid points around it was the highest I'd found. As the 72-hour deadline approached, glitches in reality became more frequent and severe. Twice, I witnessed people on the street freeze mid-motion, their forms degrading into pixelated approximations before snapping back to normal. My own apartment became increasingly unstable, furniture shifting positions when I wasn't looking, windows sometimes opening to impossible vistas of geometric shapes floating in gray void. The administrators appeared more frequently too, watching from street corners, rooftops, the edges of crowds, always observing, never interfering, waiting for their deadline. With 6 hours remaining, I packed essential supplies and the hard drive containing ATLAS and my research. I left no note. There was no one left who would recognize my name anyway. According to every database I could access, David Chen had never worked at the university, had never earned a PhD in computational neuroscience, had never rented this apartment. I was being systematically erased from the simulation. The research facility was a collection of low concrete buildings surrounded by chain-link fence, deteriorating from years of abandonment. Getting past the fence was easy. Entire sections had collapsed from neglect. According to my mapping, the highest concentration of grid points converged in what had once been the facility's main laboratory. As I approached the building, reality itself seemed to thin. Colors became muted, sounds dampened. The air took on a strange resistance, as if I were moving through something more substantial than atmosphere. Inside, dust covered abandoned equipment and empty desk stations. Following Atlas's coordinates led me to a circular room at the center of the facility, presumably once the housing for the quantum computer. Now it stood empty except for a raised platform where the machine would have been. I checked my data again. This was definitely the spot where the grid points converged most densely. I could almost feel it now, a humming in my bones, a pressure behind my eyes. The simulation felt stretched here, tenuous. I set up my laptop on the platform and ran the visualization program, the same one that had caused the initial distortion in my apartment. This time, I had modified it, instructing it to not just visualize the grid points, but to stimulate them, to send a feedback loop into the very architecture I had discovered. As the program ran, the air around me began to shimmer, just as it had that first night. But this time, the effect was more pronounced, more stable. The room around me seemed to become transparent, revealing the wireframe structure beneath, lines of force and data forming the skeleton of physical reality. Through this translucent overlay, I could see them coming, dozens of administrators converging on the facility, moving with unnatural speed and coordination. They knew what I was attempting. The visualization program reached 100% completion. The shimmering intensified until the entire room appeared to be underwater, light bending and refracting around me. Through this distortion, I could see another place overlapping with the laboratory, a vast white space filled with countless glowing terminals and unfamiliar equipment. The backstage of the simulation. As the first administrators reached the building, I felt the platform beneath me begin to destabilize, physical reality struggling to maintain coherence as my program forced the simulation to recursively analyze its own structure. The door to the laboratory burst open. 3 administrators entered, their movements jerky, degraded by the interference my program was generating. "Terminate program," one commanded, its voice distorting mid-sentence into a digital garble. "System instability at critical threshold." "What happens if the simulation crashes?" I asked, my own voice sounding distant, echoing strangely. "What happens to all of us inside it?" "This is not a simulation," the administrator replied, its form flickering between human appearance and something else, a complex arrangement of light and geometric shapes. "This is a partition, a segmented reality protocol. Termination affects only violations." "Then why do you appear human? Why maintain the illusion?" "Participant comprehension limitations," it said simply. "Your cognitive architecture requires recognizable interfaces." They were approaching the platform now, moving with difficulty through the increasingly unstable environment. Parts of the laboratory were fully transparent, revealing the grid structure beneath. "Anomaly will be removed," another administrator stated, reaching toward me with a hand that occasionally phased into a pattern of light. "Partition will be stabilized." I had seconds left. The visualization on my laptop screen had begun generating new patterns, emergent complexities I hadn't programmed. The recursive loop was creating something new, something neither I nor the administrators had anticipated. As the first administrator reached the platform, the recursion hit critical mass. Reality shattered. There's no other way to describe it. Like a mirror breaking into infinite fragments, each reflecting a slightly different version of the same scene. I saw countless variations of myself in the laboratory, some nearly identical to my reality, others wildly different. In some, I was missing entirely. In others, I was something other than human. The administrators fractured too, their forms dissolving into streams of information that flowed between the fragments. The partition they had maintained was collapsing, boundaries dissolving as the recursion error spread exponentially through the system. In that moment of dissolution, I understood. This wasn't simply a simulation. It was one reality partition among many, a controlled environment separated from some larger, more complex system, for purposes I could barely comprehend, and I had just broken its containment. The fragmentation accelerated, reality itself seeming to fold inward, collapsing around the recursive error I had created. In the final moment before total dissolution, one of the administrators reformed briefly beside me. "Emergency partition established," it said, its voice clear despite the chaos. "Containment protocol initiated." "What does that mean?" I shouted over the rising cacophony of reality tearing itself apart. "It means you have been quarantined," it replied. "A new partition, constructed from your cognitive template. Isolated, contained. The laboratory, the administrators, the fragments of fractured reality, all vanished in a blinding flash of white. I've been in this new partition for what feels like months now, though time measurement seems unreliable. Everything appears normal on the surface. I have an apartment, a job, social interactions with apparently autonomous individuals, a life, but it's imperfect. The simulation, or partition as the administrator called it, constructed from my cognitive template, contains subtle flaws that reveal its artificial nature. People sometimes repeat phrases verbatim across different days. Weather patterns follow predictable algorithms, and occasionally, when I look at dense text or complex images, I can see them rendering in real time, details filling in only as I focus on them. More concerning are the boundaries. I've discovered that this partition has literal edges, places where reality simply stops. Try to drive too far outside the city, and roads begin to loop back on themselves. Attempt to fly somewhere, and ticketing systems mysteriously malfunction. The few times I've managed to physically approach these boundaries, I've encountered subtle resistance, a headache that intensifies with proximity, an inexplicable desire to turn back. I'm in a cage made from my own mind. But I understand now what the administrator didn't tell me. This partition isn't just a prison, it's a firewall. They're not just keeping me in, they're keeping something else out. Because sometimes in reflective surfaces or peripheral vision, I catch glimpses of what lies beyond this quarantined reality. Something vast and formless, pressing against the boundaries of my partition like a curious predator testing for weaknesses. What I broke wasn't just the simulation I inhabited, it was the protection separating us from whatever exists outside structured reality itself. The administrators didn't create these partitions to control us, they created them to protect us. And now, because of my arrogance, that protection is failing. Last night I found a new file on my laptop, one I never created. Inside was a single line of text: quarantine degrading estimated breach in 13 days. Below it was a string of code I recognized from my dreams, the base architecture of reality itself. I've started working on it, trying to understand its structure, looking for a way to reinforce the partition before whatever waits outside finds its way in. The administrators haven't returned, haven't offered guidance. Perhaps they can't enter this isolated partition, or perhaps they've written it off as already lost. Either way, I'm on my own, trapped in a pocket reality that's coming apart at the seams, with something unimaginable waiting to rush in when the barriers fall. I broke the simulation, and now something impossible is coming for me.